Hello, my name is Alice Akers, and today I'm going to be walking you through my master's non-thesis project, which explores international student experiences with food insecurity. So before we get started, some big thank yous are necessary. Dr. Lewitzo has been my advisor throughout my master's degree and also my chair for this project. I literally would not be here without her today, and I cannot thank you enough. Dr. John Diaz served as my committee member, and his insights were extremely valuable. To Caroline and Gabe, my peers who helped with different elements of my project. Of course, my participants who sat down and took the time to tell their story. I literally could not have done this without you guys. And to my supporters, my friends, family, and of course the university for their help throughout this whole experience. So an overview of what we're going to discuss today, we're going to look at my survey, which was my first step in my project, my podcast, which was the main meat of this, and in conclusion, what I learned and what you can do, and some of the products that came out of this overall project. So to get started, what is food insecurity? So food insecurity can be defined as a limited or uncertain availability of food because of inadequate resources. Now, the main cause of financial stress for international students is actually immigration regulations. The big one is the fact that international students can only work a maximum of 20 hours a week for their host university, and no other form of work is allowed, and they cannot apply for federal aid. So this means if you're a student on assistantship, you're only able to live off of what you're paid by the university. Now, although international students contribute massively to the economy, in the 2020-2021 academic year, they contributed $28.4 billion. The majority of these students experience financial problems. So international students are 2 to 3 times more likely to be food insecure compared to their domestic peers. So a little bit about my perspective and why I decided to pursue this project. So I myself am an international student from Ireland. Back in 2016, I was lucky enough to receive a track and field scholarship to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln to do hammer throw. So I came out in 2016, they covered my tuition and they gave me a stipend to live off of, which worked out to be about $700. And I found myself experiencing food and resource insecurity, with rent being $500, my phone bill being $80. There just wasn't really a lot of money left over to live off of each month. So I graduated in 2020, I took a work year, and then I decided to pursue my master's degree. I was lucky enough to receive an assistantship to the University of Florida. That means that I work about 20 hours a week for the university, and then they cover my tuition and they give me a stipend, which works out to be about $1,500. And I found myself back in a very similar position to my bachelor's degree, with experiencing food and resource insecurity. So at the end of my first semester, I was still trying to decide what I wanted to pursue for my master's research or project area. And I hadn't really nailed down anything, as I wanted to do something I was passionate about, but I just hadn't found that yet. And I was actually with a professor, and I was kind of complaining, to be honest. I was complaining about the reality of just being an international student and having to live under these visa regulations, and how the stipend was extremely hard to live off of, and just the reality of it, and the food insecurity, and not really knowing how I was going to make this budget work. And he smiled and looked at me and kind of said, well, that sounds like a good topic. And that's really what gave this entire project wings. It was at that point I decided that it was a good topic, and I wanted to give other international students a chance to tell their stories and really bring some light to the reality of what it's like for international students. I think that we can do a survey and you can write a paper, and even just reading about this kind of thing is good, but it's very different to sit down and listen to people telling their stories and kind of have that human aspect. So that's why I wanted to create a project with a survey to get some background data, and then have a podcast series where people can actually listen to other international students tell their stories and their struggles with food insecurity and resource insecurity due to visa restrictions and low income stipends. So getting started with the first part of my project was a survey. So I sent out a survey to graduate level international students. They were master's and PhD students. And from that, I got 54 complete responses. 66 of these respondents received support from their host institution. And of the students who received support from their host institution, 35% of them thought it was sufficient, which means that there was 65% of these students who do not think that their funding is sufficient to live off of. So of the students who thought that funding was sufficient, their monthly mean income was about $18.79. And this is more reflective of a PhD level income. There's a slight pay gap between a master's and a PhD level. And you can see that reflected in the next point of the students who thought that the funding was insufficient. Their monthly mean income was about $14.20 a month, which is reflective of a master's level student. So looking at some of the data that came from this survey, this is when Caroline Nickerson, my colleague and friend, stepped up to help me analyze it and make sense of what it actually means. So she created an index variable, and you can see some of the questions here that we'll pull from the survey, and that was to measure food insecurity. And she also performed a number of tests, which you can read about on the slide, but if you're anything like me, you might be wondering kind of what do these actually mean. So starting with the one on the bottom left, 34% of international students chose to study in the United States without support from their host institution. Now, because these students could have other means of supporting themselves, like maybe a scholarship from their home country, whether or not a student receives financial support is not a statistically significant predictor of food insecurity. However, of the students who do receive financial support from their host institution, those who believe their financial support was insufficient were more likely to be food insecure. So this means that the money provided by the university was not enough to support these international students. And with this group, this is their only income, so they can't live off of anything else. Now, the real predictor of food insecurity for all international students, whether they receive support or not, is income. So as the income goes up, food insecurity goes down. And this was a significant statistical relationship. So getting into the meat of my project and kind of the podcast, this was where I wanted participants to be able to tell their story, but also delve into some of their struggles with food insecurity and then what they think could be done for the solutions for food insecurity. So a little bit about the participants and who they were. So I had 3 master's students and 4 PhD level students, and they came from 5 countries across the world. 2 from Saudi Arabia, 2 from Canada, 1 from Haiti, 1 from Nigeria, and 1 from Colombia. In terms of funding, there was 4 funded by the university, which in this case means that they were on assistantships, and 3 funded by their home country via a scholarship. In terms of time spent in the country, we had a wide range from 2 years to 12 years being a student. So looking at the challenges, I feel as though I really can't do the challenges faced by international students justice in such a short presentation. However, budgeting, food, and transport were something that came up in every conversation I had. Living off of the budget in general, or just living off of such a small stipend, be that the $1,500 as a master's level student or $2,000 as a PhD level student, it's tight regardless. The cost of living here in Florida is quite high, and this is something we talked about a lot, was just all the sacrifices that have to be made to make this budget work. A big source of stress, however, was the school fees. So a graduate student has about $600 in fees due at the start of every semester. And if you're a student on scholarship, your insurance is not covered the same way as if you were on assistantship and employed by the university. So you have to pay for insurance out of pocket as it is mandatory. And that's about $1,100 or $1,200 per semester. So you're looking at, $1,800 at the start of every semester. And that was a big source of stress, especially for a master's level student. That's over one paycheck, and you already don't have a lot of money left over every month to live off of, let alone to set aside so much money for the start of every single semester. But the budgeting in general can just be described best, I think, as a series of sacrifices across the board. There's no real funds for extra things. And you may think of, like, for example, professional attire. You're a graduate student, you're expected to dress, a little bit better than maybe an undergraduate student, or you have presentations or you have conferences to attend that you may need a shirt or a dress or, formal clothes in general. But if you don't necessarily have a lot of that wardrobe and then you come here, even just finding the money to go and buy the $60 shirt or the pair of shoes that you need, that is something that causes a bit of stress. Similarly with conferences, you're pushed a lot to attend conferences and at times, maybe the department doesn't have funding or you can't get funding. And that money has to come out of your food money ultimately. It's coming out of your paycheck every month. So attending conferences can be a source of stress. We talked a little bit about the social life and how that changes, not really having money to eat out or do these social events that cost money, and just having to adapt and find friends that are good with watching a movie or maybe cooking a meal at home, or finding all these adaptations and making those sacrifices of maybe you don't go to the concert and you don't go out for drinks and you don't go out for dinner. So it's just one thing after the other that you make these little cuts on. Another one, even small, that we don't really think about is, say, like subscriptions. I know for me, like I don't pay for any of my Netflix or Hulu. I've been lucky to have friends that have always let me, use their accounts, but I haven't had cable either since I moved to the States because it's just an unnecessary cost. And you really can't afford it when it's coming out of that precious food money at the end of the month. So budgeting in general is broken down as just a series of sacrifices of all levels that we really don't think about. And then you start to talk about these different cuts that you make, and you realize that you're making cuts everywhere that you can to make this budget work. Another big point that came up was food. So access and availability to cultural ingredients. This was prevalent among all of the students I spoke to. Even the students from Canada spoke about the difference in kind of like being dairy lovers and the quality in those products to here. But especially for my Saudi Arabian and my African students, being Saudi Arabian, you have to eat halal meat. The access to that in Gainesville is extremely expensive and hard. You've a couple of stores that offer halal products, and it's extremely expensive. You could pay upwards of $16 for one chicken compared to a much cheaper chicken being maybe $7 or $8 if it's not halal. So that was an issue, let alone spices and teas and stuff that is prevalent in their community, being upcharged, obviously, with only a few stores that have it. Or my African students spoke about the fact that there was only one African grocery store in Gainesville. And of course, that creates a monopoly in terms of the products and the cost of those products there, and having to have friends ship them spices and just really not being able to afford what they want to eat, because those products are so expensive. You can't really eat your African or your Saudi Arabian diet as easily. So that was a big source of stress, just kind of having to adapt to a different foods, not really liking what they're eating, not coming from, processed diets. I think international students in general come from backgrounds where there's a lot more fresh produce. And here in the States, that's the most expensive thing that you can buy. So there was a lot of, having those ramen noodle days or, cheese and bread or whatever you want to call it, but basically not really having the money to eat what you want to eat, or things getting tough towards the end of the month and you having to have those cheap $1 and $2 meals to just make it to your next paycheck. So food in general was a big source of stress for international students, and a big change, especially physically as well. You have to adapt to a new diet and not necessarily liking that new diet. Even my Colombian student and I spoke about the difference in fruits. I mean, growing up in a place where you can afford exotic fruits all the time, and then coming here, one-star fruit is like $4. So exotic fruit is very much so out the window. I know for me, even that was a big one during my bachelor's degree, was being able to afford, strawberries and stuff just wasn't really an option. It was always the apples and the oranges and the cheap fruits. So yeah, food in general was a big source of stress and just, I guess, unhappiness and not being able to eat what you want to eat. And then lastly, transport. I think this is kind of a double-edged sword. There's the not having a car. I think there's a lot of shame and guilt around asking for help with international students, having to ask for rides, feeling like a burden, just being uncomfortable and figuring ways to do it on your own. And then let's say like using the public transport, and then you have to walk to the bus stop, get the bus to the grocery store, get your groceries back on the bus. It just makes it into an ordeal and takes up a lot of time. And especially as an international student, you may need that time for school, as it does take more when you're learning another language or you have to, do that schoolwork in a foreign language. So time is an issue with the public transport, and it's just not really always reliable. And that's saying you're going to one grocery store. What happens if you have to go to more than one place, or you're looking for a pair of shoes or a shirt, and now you have to catch multiple buses. And using Lyft and Uber just isn't affordable, as those are $10, $15, $20 one way. That just doesn't work into that tight budget. And then there's the flip side of you're lucky enough to have a car, but now cars are expensive, be that car insurance. I know I pay about $250 a month, which is a massive hit into my stipend. And then, mechanical issues. If anything comes up with the car, now you're caught in a place that this is just costing you a lot out of that stipend each month. And I had students speak about the fact that they have a car, but they still use public transport, and they really only use the car for the things that they can't get to easily without it. So yeah, the challenges faced are definitely very multifaceted, but these are some of the things that came up across the board. And then looking at the participants propose solutions. This was my favorite part of the conversation. I really enjoyed hearing what they think could be done better to make life better for international students. One spoke about advisors needing to having a better base understanding of visa regulations. And I think that this is a great point. There is a lot of small things that you should know, like the fact that you can only work 20 hours a week and that you can't take, like, say, an internship off campus, that can put you in a violating your visa situation. So just if you're going to be an advisor bringing in international students, maybe just having a base understanding of what they can and can't do so you don't accidentally put them in a position, especially when English isn't their first language. There is so much to read and understand about, visa regulations, and it's very easy to accidentally violate something. So having a better understanding of that so that you can help these students or guide them would be good. And then on that note, also the fact that, our international department, there's, a few people that work there and thousands of international students. So it's hard to give that assistance to everybody. So maybe having an international advisor available that can be shared among a couple of departments, that maybe those students could actually get that one-on-one help. That would be a great resource to have. Obviously, more money, that would solve a lot of issues. Increasing the stipend, even as the research shows, as the income goes up, food insecurity goes down. So increasing the student stipend would solve a lot of problems. My Saudi Arabian students spoke about creating a stronger connected international community. Within Saudi Arabian culture, they have a great sense of community, and here on campus, they have their group chats, and they have, different messaging services that when new students come in, they are connected with other Saudi Arabian students and are able to ask questions and, just generally get help. I think that this would be great for international students as a whole, because really, sometimes you find yourself in a position where you're living 20, 30 minutes away from campus because you just didn't know any better, or, just maybe not knowing where the good grocery stores that are a little bit cheaper are. And then if you're a student where you might only have, a few other students from your country here, it would be great to have a whole group that, could be pushed through UF. So when a student joins into the program, they're automatically kind of put into this group chat and given a resource where they're able to reach out to other international students and maybe have questions and get some knowledge and, just have that space for them. An REC student, or REC stands for Research Education Centers. Now, these are all throughout the state. They can be found both rurally and in urban settings. The rural settings are particularly tough because generally they are quite some distance, or there's a bit of a drive to a grocery store. I know I visited one in the Everglades, and most of the students that worked at this research center were international students that had to live and work on site, and the grocery store was quite a drive, and it's just not necessarily fair for the few that are lucky enough to get a car to be responsible for bringing the whole population to the grocery store. So having something where the university provides transport to a grocery store on maybe a bi-weekly basis, or even just offering some of the basics on base so that those students can get those without going to the grocery store, would make access to food in general just a lot easier. Relaxing visa restrictions to let students work more on the side. This kind of puts it back on the back of the international student, where they have to make the sacrifices and the choices to figure out their balance between, working more in school. However, that's not easily done through the university, and that was something that would have to be passed on a government level. So that's, not something that we can put into effect straight away. Halal food options on campus. This was a big shock to me. We have 2,000 to 3,000 students that are of the Muslim community here at the University of Florida, and there is not any halal food options for them on campus. I think that's something very easily we could rectify by introducing some halal food options in some of the restaurants that are here on campus, that they can go and get food on campus without having to go off campus to get a meal. And that would help reduce food insecurity, especially when times when maybe you don't have time to get something ready. At least being able to get that quick meal on campus makes a big difference. Subsidizing meal plans or coupons for grocery stores. I thought that this was a good kind of intermediate step if it's going to take a while to boost stipends for international students. Maybe instead of giving, instead of charging the full whatever price for the dining hall is, there could be a $5 pass for international students that let them get access to these dining halls at a cheaper rate, given we know that the income isn't really enough and that they can't subsidize it. Or similarly, providing coupons or a stipend for grocery stores to help with food in general. Lastly, transparency. I thought that this was a great one. Just being more honest and transparent with international students before you bring them over here. Giving them a detailed layout of how much they're being paid, how much, the school fees are going to be, what to expect, the cost of living, some of the grocery costs, and just letting the student actually pick if this is the best choice for them before they're in this situation and just have to, survive basically. So those were some of the solutions that we talked about. And I think that they're all very good points that can definitely be put into effect. So in conclusion, all of this will be able to be found on streamingscience.com. You will be able to find the podcast series there, as well as this obviously presentation and a page that will look at more of my project. One of the products that came out of this project, I was lucky enough to partner with the Field and Fork pantry here on campus, and we created a VR tour, a virtual reality tour of the pantry, in hopes that it will help overcome some of the barriers for students that may be a little bit nervous to kind of go to this space. So this way that they can go and actually look at the pantry online before they ever have to go there in person. And they can click on these different buttons, and they provide information points about how it works, and just generally see what the products are that they could access at the food pantry. Now, this VR tour was done the day after a massive restock, which happens once a month here. So this is the pantry looking a little bit more full, but I think it still gives students a good idea of some of the items that they can expect. So lastly, I also wanted to play a short clip from one of my podcast episodes because I think he speaks so well on this issue.
We as international students, we are kind of resilient. So we are struggling, but we hide everything. We show happy face. We show success. We show good. We show strength, but we hide our problem. And other people who might be able to help us. When I say help, not individual help, I talk about system. Other people, other policy makers, they don't really aware about our situation. People who decide on our situation, on our visa status, for example, on our number of hours working, for example, funding, they think we are good. They think we are comfortable in our situation because we don't express ourselves about that. So I was like that. I was someone who hide my situation. But I think it's really important to express ourselves, to say, hey, we are struggling. We can't breathe. So they can hear us, and maybe they can decide, and we can have a better life and better situation as international students.
I chose to play this clip because I think he speaks so well about this topic, and it's a great example of some of the conversation we had. There's a big spiral of silence, which means the minority opinion falls more silent as the majority opinion grows. And that's really the fact that, international students feel as though they can't complain. We're so grateful and so thankful to be given this opportunity, to have received a free education or be given a stipend to live off of. But the reality is it's just not enough to live on. And they feel as though they can't say that things are tough because they're met with, well, you could always just go back to your own country then, or you're classed as ungrateful. And that's just not the case. Life is just really tough. So a little bit about what maybe you can do. I think a big one is having some compassion as a faculty or as a professor, just being aware that international students, what they have to deal with, they're people that have come here all on their own, far away from family, and they're kind of thrust into a tough existence. They're struggling to make ends meet. Money is tight. Everything is different. They're often learning another language. I have so much respect for the resilience of these students, but it is tough. And just being aware of that is a big one. And, if you're a friend or a peer of an international student, maybe don't always invite them to dinner, although it's nice, to invite them to dinner or drinks or coffee. At the end of the day, they all cost money, and maybe they don't really have the funds, and that's why they're saying no. Maybe it's the fact that they do want to do something, but that can be changed to, have a movie at your house or go for a walk or do something that doesn't necessarily cost money. Just being a little bit more aware of their financial situation, I think, is a big one when it comes to international students. On a departmental level, I think that we could implement having like a food pantry of our own within like a department or two, where there's maybe a bookshelf in one of the main rooms that we can put some items, and getting the faculty and the staff to donate rather than the students, because obviously they're the ones that most need it. So having the faculty donate some items that students could maybe take if they need, and that kind of overcomes the barrier of having to go to the food pantry. Or maybe it would encourage them to be able to, go to the food pantry if they're a little bit wary of going there, but being able to get some items that they need in a space that they're already comfortable in, I think would be a good help. On a university level, I think we're very lucky to have such a great food pantry here on campus, but making that food pantry mobile may help overcome some of the issues that we have with food insecurity. Going around to different major apartment complexes or student housing areas on a bi-weekly basis and offering international students and graduate students the ability to come down from their apartment and grab things that they need. That might just help with some of the issues with maybe, the reluctancy to actually go to the establishment, or it's a transport issue and getting the groceries back to their house is a reason why they don't go. So I think making that mobile would be a good way to help overcome some of the food insecurity challenges here on campus. My own personal beliefs to kind of wrap things up, I think that the University of Florida is a top research university, and we have some great faculty and researchers here. I don't see why there's no reason why we can't do a cost of living analysis on a yearly or bi-yearly basis and see how much it actually does cost to live in Gainesville, Florida, and then pay our graduate students appropriately, but especially our international students. They're brought from all across the world. We bolster the diversity of the university, but they're landed in a situation where they can't afford to live, they're not paid enough to live, and they can't subsidize their income at all. The cost of living keeps going up, but the pay of $1,500 for a master's student or $2,000 for a PhD student hasn't changed in years, and it's just simply not comfortable for these students. So I think paying these students appropriately is one of the big things that needs to be done, and that it needs to reflect the actual cost of living. So it's been a pleasure to walk you guys through my project today. I hope that it has been informative, and I would always be happy to answer any questions. Feel free to leave any, comments or stories. There's going to be a speak pipe at the bottom of this page where other people can leave their thoughts. And of course, if you'd like to reach out to me via email, I would be happy to answer any questions. But thank you so much for tuning in.